Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. A very good morning to all the speakers, Prof. Nordin, the Director of Higher Education Leadership Academy, and all the speakers, all the audience who are together with us in this DOF Series 3 with the topic of leading universities towards achieving sustainable development goals in higher education, lessons from COVID-19. For your all information, this is the third series as a continuous sessions from 3 series. The first one being series on mainstreaming value-based education in universities, leadership and management perspective. And then it was followed by series 2, humanities and higher education post-COVID, synergies among science, technology and humanities. This series of DOF dialogue on value-based educations is a collaborative project between Higher Education Leadership Academy, AKEPT, and International Islamic University. For today's session, we are very glad to have 3 speakers with us, 3 international known speakers with us to speak on sustainable development goals and the role of universities and implications from COVID. For today, for the smooth running of the sessions, forgive me to talk a bit on a bit of logistical and operational information for us to make sure that we have the best discussion that we should have. On the slide that we share, you can see that you are strongly advised to unmute your mic, and we will mute you in the dialogue sessions, except for the speakers. We are putting also a questionnaire for us to have some ideas at the end of the 3 speakers sessions before the dialogue sessions. Okay, so hopefully we will have a very interesting discussion from now onwards. Yeah, we would also like to inform that the session is being put live on YouTube. So if you feel like sharing it with your friends in FB and etc., it is now live from YouTube as well. And you can put up questions there together with questions in the chat box in this Zoom that we will be picking up towards in the dialogue sessions. All right, everybody, to start our sessions, there's also a scan QR code for those who are in need of attendance record that you could put your QR code here. Okay, everyone, I guess we are ready for this. So for the first welcoming for this first session, I would like to welcome Prof. Nordin to give welcome remark and also a bit of expectation and objective for the sessions today and for the whole series. Please, Prof. Nordin, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Zainal Abidin, for starting series 3 of AKEPT Talk, Dialogue on Values-Based Education series, and thank you to International Islamic University Malaysia for hosting this webinar panel session again. Distinguished invited speakers, chairman and members of the LPU, the vice chancellors and senior management of the universities, professors, and all distinguished participants of this AKEPT Talk, either officially registered participants who are in the Zoom webinar room or those who are following the session through live FB and YouTube channels. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning or good evening, depending where you are located, and salam sejahtera. On behalf of AKEPT, the main organizer of this program, I wish to extend a warm welcome to all participants of the AKEPT Talk, Dialogue on Values-Based Education, Series 3 entitled Leading Universities Towards Achieving Sustainable Development Goals in Higher Education, Lessons from COVID-19. As mentioned by Dr. Zainal, this is the final session in a series of 3 programs lined up under the theme of Dialogue on Values-Based Education. We have conducted 2 sessions of AKEPT Talks in the past 2 weeks. The first session was under the title of Mainstreaming Values-Based Education in Universities. And for the second session, we deliberated on synergies among science, technology, and humanities in post-COVID-19 era. Both series were very engaging sessions that attended by more than 300 participants each. We have many more who attended through FB Live and YouTube channels. In fact, the video for AKEPT Talk Series 2 has been viewed more than 3,500 times. I would like to take this opportunity to thank IIUM as AKEPT's strategic partner in making this talk series a success. Thank you to IIUM Sejahtera Center for Sustainability and Humanity, led by Associate Professor Dr. Zainal Abidin Sanusi as our focal person on this AKEPT IIUM strategic collaboration, and also to Director Tan Sri Professor Zulkifli Abdul Razak for his continued support. To those from abroad or new to Malaysia higher education scenario, AKEPT is one of the divisions under the Ministry of Higher Education Malaysia that focuses on identifying, compiling, profiling, developing, and sustaining leadership talent pool for higher education institutions in Malaysia. We are going to organize various leadership and talent development programs for higher education leaders since our establishment in 2008. One of the programs is AKEPT Talk. AKEPT Talk is a series of intellectual discourses organized by AKEPT with the aims to provide platform for potential higher education leaders to be exposed to the values and competencies of leadership so as to nurture them into successful leaders in the universities. Through this talk series, participants gain knowledge on academic leadership, academic management, and institutional leadership from renowned experts and practitioners. The structure of the talk series varies from keynote addresses to panel sessions like this of various topics related to higher education. Due to COVID-19, as we all are aware, we have to shift our programs online. This is our 6th public webinar that we organized this year and the 4th edition on the talk series. Today, we are very fortunate to have another group of 3 prominent speakers who will continue our dialogue on values-based education. And then later we'll have further discussion around the topic during Q&A session. We have invited prominent practitioners of SDGs from 3 corners of the world: Canada, Australia, and Malaysia. First speaker is Professor Charles Hopkins, who is holding the UNESCO Chair in Reorienting Education Towards Sustainability at York University, Toronto, Canada. Professor Hopkins is also the advisor to the United Nations Universities Global Network of Regional Centers of Expertise on ESD. We hear a lot on ESD today, and co-director of Asia Pacific Institute on Education for Sustainable Development in Beijing, China. He will talk about integrating sustainable development goals into higher education. Number 2, Professor Jeff Scott, who is the Emeritus Professor of Higher Education and Sustainability at Western Sydney University in Sydney, Australia. He is also the leader of the Regional Center of Expertise in Education for Sustainable Development, a center endorsed by the UN for Greater Western Sydney. He will talk on the topic Leading Universities Towards Achieving SDG in Higher Education, Lessons from COVID-19, Australia's Experience. Third speaker is Professor Dr. Sumiani Yusof, the Director for Institute of Ocean and Earth Science, University of Malaya, Malaysia. He will talk about implementation of SDG plans in Malaysia and all its challenges. Thank you to all speakers for making time to be with us today. Associate Professor Dr. Mohze, who is currently the Deputy Director of AKEPT Center for Leadership Development, will be the moderator for panel session this morning. Thank you, Dr. Mohze, for taking up this job this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, the UN 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals have reaffirmed the desire of all countries and people to achieve a just and sustainable society. This ambition at the highest level now needs to be translated into actions. We need to address the community and world's prevalent problems holistically and collectively. Government efforts will be necessary, but probably not sufficient. Everyone needs to contribute in this ambition, but how can this be achieved at the scale level? Education must be a key part of this agenda. It is only through education in all of its forms that the people, and particularly the emerging generations of the next 15 years, can be impacted in the fulfillment of the aspirations captured in the 2030 UN agenda. The agenda calls for a fundamental transformation in society, institution, and the economy, such that we do not leave anyone behind. New policies, institutional reforms, and technical solutions will not be sufficient if they do not receive popular support and proper infrastructure. As almost all of us here are in education ecosystem, either as in leadership position or faculty members, administrative staff, as well as we are the member of the community or industry, we should be committed. We should be committed of educating the next generation of learners who will be innovative professionals and leaders who help people and communities flourish, who are ethical thinkers and creative problem solvers, knowledgeable in their disciplines, and eager for collaboration and continuous learning, as well as committed to the values of social justice, sustainability, integrity, and dedicated to bring prosperity to mankind. Ladies and gentlemen, the question remains that how to strategically plan for transformation and change to take place in our institutions, such that we could deliver the desired philosophy and aspired noble mission of education. How to inspire the whole institution to contribute to the society and community with great impact. Today, we'll have the opportunity to learn from the experts on how to visioning the objectives of SDG into strategic direction of our institutions. Hopefully there will be conversation on how to translate the vision into system and actions effectively and efficiently. It is indeed not only the responsibility of policymakers and the leaders of education institutions, but also every one of us in the ecosystem, irrespective of our position and roles, to ensure that the true mission of education goals can be achieved and our institutions are relevant to society, especially in post-COVID-19 era. We hope that at the end of the program, participants will gain essential knowledge to face the challenges of leading institutions. It is hoped that the insights through this program will shape the thought process and strategic actions which could then be used to sustain our institutions. The lesson learned will make us better equipped in formulating strategic direction and visioning to cope better with the changes and transformation needed. With that, I would like to wish all participants every success in this program. Thank you again to IIUM Sejahtera Center for co-organizing this program with AKEPT, and to all participants in this AKEPT talk for your continuous support. I wish all of you all the very best. We are all in this together. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alaikum salam. Thank you very much, Prof. Nordin, for very interesting opening up and setting up the common ground and interesting questions that we look forward to address with the help and guidance from the speakers. With that note, without further ado, I would now like to pass the mic or the sessions to Dr. Munze, the Deputy Director of our Education Leadership Academy. Please, Dr. Munze.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Zainal and Prof. Nordin for your welcoming remark. And a quick recap to our DELF series. I would like to welcome everyone to the final session of AKEPT Talk, Dialogue on Value-Based Education. I hope everyone had a great weekend and all gear up to kick off the week. We and AKEPT are super excited to bring you to another set of distinguished speakers in this third series to discuss on value-based education. Just to remind everyone again, the AKEPT Talk format will have talks by our speakers, which I'm going to introduce later, and followed by a dialogue and question and answer session. So in order to avoid screen fatigue to our audience, we will keep our speakers to lecture for about 30 minutes each, and the dialogue session for another 30 minutes. And we're going to have a short photography session at the end of the event to capture everyone. All right, now I would like to introduce our first speakers. Prof. Charles Hopkins holds the UNESCO Chair in Reorienting Education Towards Sustainability at York University in Toronto, Canada. So this chair, established in 1999, was the first UNESCO chair to focus on education for sustainable development as a central concept purpose of education. Prof. Hopkins coordinates two research networks focused on ESD. One network is International Network of Teacher Education Institution, which spans approximately 50 countries, focusing on reorienting teacher education towards a sustainable future. It currently addresses the SDG and also Global Education 2030 agenda. So the second network, Indigenous ESD, spans approximately 40 countries, focusing on engaging ESD content and pedagogy in reorienting education and training to improve the lives of Indigenous youth. Prof. Hopkins is a founding developer of UN University's Region Center of Expertise on ESD and has been involved in the founding over 30 RCEs worldwide. He is an advisor for UNESCO UNIVOC regarding the greening of TVET and has collaborated with UNFCCC and UNEP in the past. He serves as the co-director of the Asia Pacific Institute on ESD, Beijing, China. Talking on integrating sustainable development goals into higher education, I would like to welcome Prof. Charles Hopkins, UNESCO Chair in Reorienting Education Towards Sustainability from York University, Canada. Please welcome.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and good morning, everyone. Actually, good evening here in Toronto, but a fine good morning to you there. I'd like to really thank AKEPT and IIUM for holding this series. It's extremely timely, and in particular, I would like to thank you for inviting me. I have really enjoyed listening to the previous speakers, and I hope that I can add something useful this morning. Let me just put my slides up. So this morning, my talk is to aim at how we can integrate the SDGs into higher education. And at the same time, I want to talk about the impact of COVID, put it in that context, and also to put it in the context that is so unique to this series, and that's the idea of a dialogue on values education. This is, I think, extremely important. Previous speakers have clearly built the case for the engagement of higher education. So I don't want to go there, but I do want to begin by acknowledging that the issues that's facing the planet right now, COVID is but one. COVID hit us very quickly and shut down education pretty well 95% right around the world. It's very, very unique. But at some point, we also need to understand the slow moving, creeping disasters that are facing the planet as well. So as we try to address COVID, how can we think in a bigger picture, especially those who are leaders in higher education? Previous speakers have pointed out that it's a small percentage of people globally who actually get to attend higher education, probably 7-8%, somewhere in there. But that 7 or 8% will become 78% of the shapers of the world in the future. So this dialogue that is going on about the responsibility of the university to serve the individual, but at the same time, what is the responsibility to society, especially if higher education is funded largely by civil society? So if we look at these issues, and it was interesting that the gentleman from the Netherlands Richard spoke about fascism, you know, as another. There are social issues, the separation of political ideals and values and so on that is sweeping around the world. There's so many of these various issues. Now, I also want to put it in sort of a historical perspective. At the end of the Second World War, really, that's when we realized that no one country was an island. You know, pardon me, Jeff, Australia is, but you know, you don't set the price of coal, you know, or wool. It's the same as every country needs to interact. And so it was the end of the Second World War where they set up the mechanism of the United Nations where we could at least come together and talk about our issues. But it was really in the context we're talking about now is the first time that the world came up with an overarching development paradigm. And the idea of not just development to lift people out of poverty, but it had to be development that wasn't going to create even greater problems. And so the idea emerged in '87 with the idea of sustainable development, followed 5 years later with the first of the implementation plans. It's one thing to come up with a concept, but then what do we do about it? Almost the same concept of what do we do within higher education? We can come up with the concept, but how do we implement it, right? And so the first implementation plan was Agenda 21. And I should note that within Agenda 21, not only was education given its own chapter, along with training and public awareness and understanding, but it was mentioned in all 40 chapters. Right? It seemed to be crucial. And then and that was 92 to 2000, 2000 to 2015, we had the Millennium Development Goals that targeted some countries, the least developed countries. And then we realized that no, this was a job for every country. Everybody had a role. And so we now have Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is a long perspective, and within higher education, we should already be thinking beyond the concept of sustainable development. We should be thinking 2030 and beyond, because we realize the limitations of the concept of sustainable development. It was the best idea we could come up with in 1987 that we could get world leaders to agree upon. And so we searched and came up with these 17 goals. Now, these in a way are values. These, at least the first 16, identify the big issues that the world leaders agree upon are important. So ending poverty, addressing hunger, educating everyone, have emerged sort of as global values. And I think that's one of the things we need to keep in touch with. Now, one of them, again, we have on education. And within these are the 7 sort of targets plus 3 other aspirations that come after it. But you can see that 4.3 talks about affordable quality technical, vocational, tertiary, and university education. Now, this is fleshed out when you get in and start reading the fine print. And one we want to focus on in our talk this morning is 4.7, and that's the knowledge and skill from an education perspective for sustainable development. And in 4.7, it calls upon embedding education for sustainable development at all levels, including education at the university level. Interestingly enough, it also calls for global citizenship education. So one way of looking at it, if I build on the session one, is the idea of ESD sort of informing, but global, or the information, but global citizenship education as sort of forming the human, the person, the institution. So if I could make that build. Now, people are saying, what is education for sustainable development? A lot is written, and I'll quickly point out the first part is access and retention in quality education. Now, we can discuss what is quality education, especially when we get to higher education. What are the indicators of quality, and what, how do we measure it, and so on? Countries without that educated human capital will have no development or very little development. But the second part is really important, because it was this second part where we determined that it was our most educated countries that were often creating the greatest and deepest ecological footprints on the planet. So it was reorienting the purpose of our education systems to from development to sustainable development. The third part is public awareness and understanding, and the fourth part of training programs, where we work from there. Now, the United Nations General Assembly, just as they did with the Agenda 21, in identifying that education played a role in all aspects, they have agreed at the UN General Assembly that education is key to the implementation of all of these of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is where I want to bring it then to COVID. The UN has put COVID at the middle and then identified the role. You can, we'll post the link to this so that you'll be able to actually read it. But it shows you that every one of the goals, it's sort of linked in some way to a particular issue. And this is a new way of thinking. Early in session 2, the director was of the Science Academy was showing a new way of conducting science, of linking, of university professors and so on, sharing knowledge quickly, rapidly working together in sort of a greater cause than having an article published in some journal to be read by 5 people. You know, it lifted things much, much higher. But this is an aspect of how we need to rethink our various faculties and how we bring them together. The whole concept that was so important is this SDG 17, which is the idea of partnerships. You see, in the beginning, back in '92, when we had Agenda 21 and so on, we were counting upon the governments to take the lead, and this would be done by governments. Now we realize that we must have civil society, we must have the private sector, we have to have education, especially higher education, but also K through 12, because that's where most people will go, and that's where values, attitudes, ethics, perceptions are all formed. So they must be there as well. The non-government organizations, how do we work together in order to try and move forward? Now, in forming partnerships, what has happened is that the UNESCO, who has been asked to take the lead on the education component, SDG 4, are just now releasing a framework to go from 2020 to 2030. Okay? And in it, they have identified 5 areas that are crucial and I think relate to all university leaders. The first one is transforming our learning environments themselves. In other words, transforming higher education. And now I'll go into this more deeply. The second, though, is looking at the capacity of the educators themselves. Those in faculties of education don't necessarily, who are preparing new teachers, don't necessarily understand the complexities of education for sustainable development. Your biology professors may not necessarily know. So there needs to be schemes and strategies for addressing that. The whole idea of policy needs to be there. And of course, we've all seen the students marching. How do we relate to the students who not only are they concerned, marching, they are demanding what should go into their classes and so on. So that's another important part. And then the idea, Malaysia, I think 3 or maybe 4 of these regional centers of expertise. So the idea of how can universities work at the local level to build more sustainable communities. Now, UNESCO is coming up with programs. As I said, one of the big ones now is imagining the world to come, where they are trying to look at education well out into the future. And they are coming out with excellent position papers that I think will really apply to education leaders. UNESCO earlier this year also launched something called the Futures of Education. As we move from the Delors report, remember the Learning the Treasure Within, where they identified the purpose of education as learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together. Now they're questioning, what is the purpose of education? What has changed? And so on. Again, extremely important ideas for people to talk about. And they are already now in another phase where they are looking at the impact of COVID. Now, higher education has been involved in this right from the very beginning, even before Rio, when the concept of sustainable development was first agreed upon in 1987. University leaders started meeting. They formed the Talwa Declaration. That was followed in 1991 by the Halifax Declaration, where over 100 university presidents gathered in Halifax, Canada, and talked about how could they raise the profile of higher education at Rio, and also to clarify their responsibility and how could they contribute. Now the International Association of Universities is once again engaging and taking the lead. And for each of the first 16 Sustainable Development Goals, they have put together clusters of universities working on it. Our university here at York is the lead on SDG 4. And then the International Association of Universities itself is taking, as an institution, is taking on SDG 17. But again, we'll put the links up there. Now, I'm not sure about the
stripes, yeah.
The stripes. I'm very sorry. So what I would no, we'll move on. Here we've got more stripes. Huh? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what is happening. Okay. What I want to do to put it into the implementation phase is to look at the 3 big operations of universities, right? So first of all, teaching and learning, research, and then community service. So if we start looking at teaching and learning, how do we work with all of the different disciplines within our institution? What can medicine do? What can dentistry do? What can engineering do? But really importantly, the social sciences, because if we're looking at transformational change, we need to look right across the spectrum and start looking at things in a transdisciplinary way and a transformative way of doing it. And in particular, when we get down onto the learning, I think that this is the discussion that is emerging from your series of KPI, the assessment, what gets measured. The important thing from my perspective is that I'm not against the rankings and that sort of thing, but understand it's important, just as the OECD measures school systems and so on. When you measure math and language and science, you're measuring tools. The important thing, yes, we all want our graduates to be as good as they possibly can in their profession, and we measure the sharpness of their tools. But the important thing from our discussion in these three is, what do they do with the tools? What do they build? How do they act? How do they relate? What are they actually going to become engaged in? So that's the one, the curriculum and the teaching and learning. Can I get to that? Yeah. The second one is research. And from a time point, I'm going to move along. I see I've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. So this, in the research, we need to be thinking about what research we're going to fund. What is the purpose of it? What would be the outcome of this kind of research? So the idea of research in the pursuit of well-being, but not limited to humans. That's one of the great problems of the concept of sustainable development. It is so human-centric. So what we need to think of is the well-being of all life on the planet. We need to be thinking of STEM in particular, the purpose of STEM, and understanding the impact of STEM. How can we align this with biomimicry? There are many things that I think that your university needs to discuss and come up with policy as to what are your priorities? What do you want to be known for, right? The two trains, of course, are Japan. And you can see two different designs, one for going on the flat and one for going through tunnels. The one that looks like the platypus on the right is one that's designed after the platypus, where it can go through shallow streams without detection and throwing up a wake. So that engine can go through tunnels without huge shock waves and so on. So designing with biomimicry. Now, the third one, though, that I think is extremely important is the whole thing of community service. Now, Gombak, where you are, that is the newest regional center of expertise in the world, and is aligning itself with the indigenous communities. So indigeneity is an important component of the whole thing. But the number one, I feel, is modeling, showing that it's not just something you teach, it's what you live by, it's what you do. It's embedding sustainability in the DNA of your institution, right? How do we go about that? How do you use your prestige as an institution, as leverage, when you work as partnership with the community around you? How do you use this new expertise that's emerging of online learning? How can you use that to reach people who would never dream of getting into higher education? And how do you modify some of your programs into mini courses that are tailored, say for the shrimpers or you know the people in community that desperately need you? So these are providing the information technology, the training, and so on, and advocating for people. These are all extremely important. Dr. Razik spoke of whole institution approach, and this is an extremely important concept that has emerged since, about 2012. That the idea of how do you embed this into the ethos, into the culture of the institution. So it's not just one course. And of course, embedded in that has to be the questioning of values, ethics, and so on. And important for you as leaders is this whole bit about governance, right? How do you bring your board of directors on, your board of regents? How do you work with the if you have trade unions that are there? How do you work with those who are going to hire your graduates? How do you have them become partners and understand the importance of what you're doing? One of the questions of the last speakers from the other series is, how do we in 2020 prepare people to live in 2040? And trying to envision what is out there. And again, in monitoring and evaluation, that discussion about not only measuring the sharpness of their tools, but finding ways of identifying what they are going to do with those tools. Some of you may have known Gus Speth was very, very a popular leader of the United Nations Development Program. And I love this quote. He said, I used to think the top sustainability problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, climate change, and that with good research and good science, we could correct all that. There's still a lot of people who are out there in geoengineering and putting huge aluminum foil sheets in the sky to reflect the sun and so on. But he said, after working in the communities and so on, the real problems are selfishness, greed, apathy, and to deal with, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. What is the role of higher education in doing that? One of the ways, and once again, Dr. Razik talked a lot about IIUM of the spirituality, measuring, and so on. And I would like to suggest that if we go back into the indigenous teachings, and this is all over the Americas, and I would suspect that it would be, if you were to look in other parts of the world, what's called the Seven Grandfathers teaching, the ideas of respect, honesty, truth, humility, courage, wisdom, love, that these would be extremely worthy ones to embed in the culture of the institution. The whole need to seek for these larger principles, because one of the questions that we get asked when I'm talking about this, one of the questions comes up, whose values? Are you going to impart your values on my children, especially when you're talking about in K through 12? There's a lot of good literature out there on it, but whether you teach values, you clarify existing values, and so on, what you do with that. But I would like to share with you the Earth Charter. Now, the Earth Charter is something that was built over many years, and in it represented by ordinary people from all around the world. And there are about 50 or 60 values that are in there. And as an education point, have them go through those values and pick out the ones they disagree with, and then start a discussion from there. So that I just put that forward as a tip that has worked nicely for me before. At any rate, let me close there. And I thank you for giving me the time to share some of these ideas, and hopefully they will start some discussion in a little while. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Prof. Hopkins, for the fruitful talk. Indeed, Sustainable Development Goals can be a strong proponent to value-based education. And with UNESCO initiative, we hope that this can be propagated to all levels of education. Before we move on to the second talk, I would like to give a brief background of our next speaker. So Dr. Jeff Scott is an Emeritus Professor of Higher Education and Sustainability at Western Sydney University, Australia. From 2004 to 2012, he was the Pro Vice Chancellor in Quality and Executive Director of Sustainability at Western Sydney University. During this time, he led a range of successful external quality audits and established the UN-endorsed Regional Center of Expertise in Education for Sustainable Development at Western Sydney University. In the 2020 Times Higher Education Impact Rating on Sustainability in Higher Education, Western University was ranked 3rd in the world. And he is widely published author of reports and articles on change leadership, sustainability, social entrepreneurship, professional capability, and what distinguishes successful early career graduates in wide range of professions, assuring achievement standards and quality assurance in higher education. His book, Turnaround Leadership for Higher Education with Canada Michael Fullen, received the US College Bellwether Award, and his international study of successful change leader of education for sustainable development, turnaround leadership for sustainability in higher education, is widely used around the world. Talking on Australia experience in leading universities toward achieving sustainable development goal in higher education, I would like to welcome Professor Emeritus Jeff Scott from Western University, Sydney, Australia. Please welcome.
Hey, well, thank you very much, and I'm delightful again to be with you and to be actually participating today with my good friend Charles Hopkins from Canada. So we've met occasionally. I think the last time we got together was in Okayama at a meeting of the Sustainable Development on the Sustainable Development Goals of RCE. So what I'm going to do today is just basically talk about what we've been doing in Australia, but also around the world in terms of addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. After I left Western Sydney University and where I was provost for a while, I got asked by the Australian government to have a look at whether our universities in Australia were producing graduates for the last 50 years or for the next 50 years. And so what I did from 2014 to 2017, 2018 was to actually work with 160 universities around the world and 3,700 learning and teaching leaders, just looking at that very issue. And now from that, I just want to alert you to this. From that, we produced a site called the Flip Correct site, which is actually currently being used by 15,000 groups of higher educators around the world to review their curriculum to see if they're producing graduates who are simply work ready for today. In other words, just trained to actually fit in with what everyone wants today, or whether they're in fact work ready plus for an uncertain tomorrow. So that site is called Flip Correct. And I'm going to just, as I talk today about the sustainable development initiatives that are that we've been doing in Australia and around the world, I wanted just to alert you to the fact that there's more detail of what I'm saying on that site. Now, what does Work Ready Plus mean? So what we've come up with, the 3,700 learning and teaching leaders and myself, is the idea of being work ready is to be competent for today, to have skills and knowledge for today's world. So to be an accountant, just as you need to be an accountant today. But of course, as COVID has pointed out to us, you never really know what's going to happen tomorrow. So essentially, you have to be developing, as Charles said, you've got to develop graduates who are not just work ready. You know, people going to university do want to get the skills to help them get a job. You know, it's naive to think it's otherwise. But the plus is key, the Work Ready Plus. And what is the Work Ready Plus? Well, for us, it's to be sustainability literate. That's social, cultural, economic, and environmental. And as you know, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals fall into those, a mix of those four categories: social, cultural, economic, and environmental, and they all interact. They're not actually separate goals at all, they are interactive. So to be sustainability literate, every graduate should be familiar with that first. The second, they need to be change implementation savvy. And that, in a sense, is again what Charles was talking about. It's no good for everyone to have a lot of knowledge if they can't engage mad people, people who don't care, if they can't engage them with change. So there really needs to be a lot more focus, we say, in universities around the world on how do you engage the disengaged? How do you engage those who don't want to change? So the second is change implementation savvy. The third is to be inventive and creative. That's not just commercially inventive, but socially inventive. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that because we're doing projects at the moment within Australia and around the world on social entrepreneurship as they address the Sustainable Development Goals. So Work Ready Plus means sustainability literate, change implementation savvy, inventive, socially, not just commercially. And finally, and very importantly, and this throws very directly to the work I've done with AKEPT over the years, looking at leadership in Malaysia, and that is it has to throw, the fourth dimension of being sustainability, to be Work Ready Plus, is to be clear on where you stand on the tacit assumptions driving the 21st century agenda. And there are many of those, but there are four that we've identified. The first is that growth is good for everyone. That just looking at gross domestic product is what the answer of life. That's the first tacit assumption. Every graduate should work out where they truthfully stand on that. The second is consumption is happiness. When in doubt, buy a new iPhone. The third is information technology is always the answer. Always the answer. And the fourth one is that globalization and uniformity is really excellent. We should be totally linked. We should be outsourcing everything in countries. And, you know, you can see where populists have started to come in on that one. So the first point I wanted to make to you today, I suppose, is that if we're looking at the moral purpose of higher education, the work that we're doing commends for you to have a little look at that notion of being Work Ready Plus, an institution that's actually producing Work Ready Plus graduates. That's competent people, but also the plus is capable people. Now, I'm quite confident in what we're saying in that we've been studying for the last 25 years successful graduates in 10 professions. And the capabilities they've got are the very ones that Chuck was talking about earlier about values. The people who end up being most effective as successful graduates in medicine, information technology, engineering, teaching, journalism, architecture, law, we've done all of these professions. They actually have certain key personal and interpersonal capabilities. They do not just have lots of skill and knowledge. In other words, they don't just have work-ready competencies, they have capabilities to engage people with those dimensions that I've mentioned. And some of the key recurring personal and interpersonal capabilities are being able to remain calm when things go wrong, to be able to tolerate ambiguity, to listen to people who aren't your friends, who are not telling you what you want to hear, to be able to read situations and match them. Now, if that's not being picked up in the curriculum, you will not get global citizenship. Therefore, the next point I wanted to get at really is how do we actually then take what I've just said and look at what's happening in the curriculum. So that Flip Curric site actually has, and this relates to the point on the handout that I've got that's up on the screen, the first thing, which is powerful assessment. So basically in the Flip Curric site, we've got 240 examples, peer-reviewed examples of powerful assessment. I want to identify just two that relate to what I've said. The first is there's an enormous amount of interest now in building social entrepreneurship capstones into the curriculum, using regional centres of expertise, using Enactus and other networks, the Copernicus network in Europe, to identify worthwhile social entrepreneurship projects for students to work collaboratively on with their communities around the Sustainable Development Goals. Not just one of them, but it's always a mix of Sustainable Development Goals. And as you'll see in a moment, and as Chuck has already mentioned, the COVID-19 actually identifies a large number of ways in which the Sustainable Development Goals work together. So the first thing that's happening around the world at the moment is social entrepreneurship capstones. And the Flip Curric site has some wonderful examples of those. The second one is there's a lot of interest now in actually having in the curriculum capstone programs in every single degree, looking at the dilemmas of professional practice that you will face when you get out there, identified by successful early career graduates around the dilemmas. So if you take COVID-19, there are large numbers of dilemmas that actually raises, whether you're an engineer, a doctor, a nurse, a teacher, an accountant, it doesn't matter. There are dilemmas of professional practice that we believe all young graduates should actually be confronting, thinking about, and working out where they stand on those. Because in looking at how you stand on dilemmas, you're looking at your tacit assumptions, which means you're looking at your moral purpose. Because how you resolve a dilemma is a function of taking a moral decision about which path to take. Dilemmas will always have 2 or 3 different ways you could go, 2 or 3 different paths you could take. How you take those decisions is not based on brute logic, it's based actually on your moral purpose, on your value system. So I just wanted to highlight then, just to reiterate, work ready plus graduates, they need those 4 dimensions. Being inventive is one of them. Social entrepreneurship projects are a way of dealing and helping people learn invention, social invention around the SDGs. And we have, this is working, this is not made up. This is happening in universities now within Australia and around the world. And the second thing that's happening around the world is capstones on dilemmas of professional practice, which we're now working, of course, to identify capstones of professional practice around COVID. As long as COVID remains a key issue, there will be other key issues that will come up. Then you pick the dilemmas for those. So that's my first point, which is number 1 on those slides there under powerful assessment. The second thing I wanted to talk about is COVID-19. And in a way, Charles has already mentioned this more eloquently than I have, but I've listed down there for you the goals that we've already identified are actually coming into play for us to have to do for work ready plus graduates to actually be prepared to address the key dilemmas. And that's, you can see them there, there's 4 goals, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 16 and 17. They all go together. They are not separate at all. They all feed into and off one another. So they're the ones that we are now working on in terms of actually social entrepreneurship projects as they would relate to COVID. So I hope this is making sense to you. I'm just going through this very quickly. I've already mentioned the dilemmas there that are coming up and how they relate to tacit assumptions. The other point that was raised again by Charles is that really there's too much focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths, and not enough focus on STEAM, science, technology, arts, arts, engineering and maths. You can't come up with scientific solutions if you don't understand the purpose of them. You can't come up with scientific explanations and answers if you don't know the purpose of what they're about and how they will impact on humanity, which really means you've got to look at the 17 goals to understand what you're doing in science. So there's a big interest and a big argument at the moment in Australia about where the arts and humanities and social sciences fit into the curriculum. A very big argument this week. The current minister is actually saying maybe we should focus far more on STEM. We're saying we need to focus on STEAM. So I wanted to raise that point for you. Now, in terms of COVID-19 and online learning, I've just identified there 6 different areas where in Australia, I work for the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency in Australia, where we re-accredit private providers and universities. And so one of the areas that I currently look at now in Australia is quality assurance for online learning. And the COVID crisis has thrown up a whole range of dilemmas around that. The first is, what is quality assurance for online learning when the universities are moving, of course, to online learning, right? So that's the first thing. And if you're interested in any of these things later on, I can tell you what we're doing in Australia on that. The second is assessment integrity. The third is virtual exchanges. And I think not all of it's been problematic. I think there's some very interesting issues that have risen now for us in terms of maybe virtual exchanges and interactions, not just always physical ones. So the notion of traveling overseas, there's a whole lot of things we're now doing in Australia, which is all around the idea of virtually working together with people in different RCEs on common sustainable development projects, for example. For example, I just helped last year to set up a new regional centre on the South Island of New Zealand, RCE Otago. So my universities and their RCE is working with their RCE on common issues as they relate to the Australasia around the Sustainable Development Goals, looking at social entrepreneurship projects around the Sustainable Development Goals. Last week, I had a big national conference with the Enactus universities in the UK. They have a wonderful site, if you're interested in it, where they've called it Enactus 2030, where they've related the hundreds upon hundreds of social entrepreneurship projects that Enactus engages in around the world. They've related those to the Sustainable Development Goals. So my point is, at the moment, there's not enough networking of the networks. We've got all of these networks. We've got the RCEs, we've got Oikos, we've got Copernicus, we've got many other networks, but no one knows what the other networks are doing. And there's an ideal moment for us to, in fact, bring together the networks in order to identify social entrepreneurship projects in which we can actually start linking up. Your new RCE in Malaysia can start to link up with other RCEs if we actually understand that we're trying to focus on common projects using online learning to link up people. Now that's already happening, as you know. My university, Brittany, has just run that youth forum around the Sustainable Development Goals in Asia and the Pacific. The other things I think we need for online learning is self-teaching guides written by successful teachers in each discipline area. There's nothing like a successful teacher to tell you what works in your own area. And as you know, the digital divide has now been thrown into great highlight around the COVID has thrown that into very great highlight. It's always been there, but it's dramatic now. And then, of course, we've all discovered that online meetings means that maybe we shouldn't be flying all the time and burning large amounts of carbon. Maybe there are times for us to do what we are now doing today, which is to actually look at when would it be appropriate for us to actually get together virtually rather than to always think the default is to travel. So COVID has thrown up some very interesting dilemmas. It's thrown up some opportunities for social entrepreneurship, and it's thrown up some very interesting highlights on what is quality assurance for online learning for the next 30 years. And I just want to finish off now. How long have I got left, roughly? I haven't been looking at the time. No one knows? Okay, I'll just carry on then. So I just want to now turn down to the last thing, which is my theme really now becomes good ideas, and I've talked about some of the things we've been doing. Good ideas with no ideas on how to implement them are wasted ideas. And there's enormous amounts of talk. There's always been large amounts of talk about what everyone should do, and there's documents produced, and there's declarations are made, and nothing changes in practice on Monday. So I now want to talk about the research that Michael Fullen and myself have been doing since the 1970s on how do you engage academics and universities in making changes work. And I want to just highlight for you, I've given references at the end of my little handout there to the work we did in 2013 where we interviewed 190 successful education for sustainable development leaders in universities around the world. And I'm just going to summarize now the 16 lessons for you, and then that will be the end of my talk. But my theme is good ideas with no ideas on how to implement them are wasted ideas. And secondly, change doesn't just happen, it must be led, but deftly. And I'm about to tell you, for what it's worth, and it'd be interesting to start to replicate this work in Malaysia, it would be interesting to see if these lessons apply in your cultural context. I believe they do. I believe also the lessons I'm about to give are actually the profile of a good graduate. And this is picking up a bit what Chuck was saying about universities should practice what they preach. Graduates in doing social entrepreneurship projects, dilemmas of professional practice in the universities should actually be seeing how the university models making change happen. And so very quickly, the first thing is to engage people in change, you need a why bother case. You need a why would we bother wanting to change? So that's the first thing. First tip, get a why bother. Why are we bothering here? The second thing is always have senior people on side. If you don't have senior people at the decision-making table at the top end, people will talk about what should happen in the university, but nothing actually will change at the top end. So you need both. The third is, and this is what I did at Western Sydney University. Now, I mean, I think you can rubbish the Times Higher Ed impact ratings, but I can tell you very much now that in actually doing a stock take of our staff back in 2010 of what we were already doing in social, cultural, economic and environmental sustainability, and building a website that anointed and illuminated what they were doing, proved to be a very interesting change management strategy to engage people with change. You always start with what people are doing, and then you acknowledge that before you start to talk about what we should do next. So that was actually one key ingredient, I think, that actually got us on the road to, for what it's worth, to become number 3 in the world. And that has actually meant that now our senior board of trustees is highly committed to focusing on building sustainability into every aspect of our university. So there's nothing like having an external tick to actually engage people internally. The next one is listen, always listen, link, leverage and lead in that order. And this is an old favorite from Michael and me. Always like do a stock take first. You listen first. You don't tell people what to do. You don't launch a policy. You go out and you trial out your ideas with the people. You link together what most people nod on and look like they think is relevant. Then you leverage a small group to scale it up for you. And then at the very end, you lead. The lead at the end is this is where we're going to go because we know we're all committed to this. So number 5 is start small and build on your successes. Number 6 is, as Chuck mentioned, always actually ask the question, how do we know we're doing a good job? And actually set up a continuous quality improvement project. Number 7 is to realize that actually change is learning. It's a learning and an unlearning process. Therefore, what engages students with change is what engages staff with change. Every single staff member, if you're interested in building the sustainable development goals into your university, then what they're going to be asking is, first of all, how is this relevant to me? Now, if you haven't got a why bother case, you haven't got a way of answering it. They'll secondly ask, how is it desirable? Is this morally decent? In the context of Islam, relevant, desirable. Is it clear what I'm going to do? And most crucially, is it feasible? Have I got room to do it? So that notion of learning and unlearning and understanding that everyone is trying to learn and understanding what motivates learning is a key underpinning theme in making change work. Number 8 is moral purpose always engages staff more than extrinsic motivations or punishment. So at my university, Western Sydney University, 50,000 students, 70% are first in their family at the university, 70% of the staff are first in their family. Our moral purpose was to make sure that we did to those what happened to us. Those who are coming in who are first in family, we wanted them to get as good a deal as we got because we were first in family and had done very well. Number 9, there's a big difference between realise there's a difference between change, which is something becoming different, and progress. Progress is actually a value judgment. And if you don't know what your position on the tacit assumptions are, then it's very difficult to start making judgments about engaging with change. And just the last few ones there, what we set up was a Vice Chancellor's Award for groups, not individuals, groups that have done a great job in actually building sustainability into the curriculum. And it's an extrinsic motivation, but it's also, if you like, an acknowledgement of groups, not individuals, making change work for people. And you do need a business case for this. It's not just sort of saying we're going to do it. You've got to have a business case, but it must always be set in the context of your moral purpose. So the future of higher education is very much about the moral purpose of the graduates who go out. And if that's the case, you have to build it into the curriculum, which means you've got to model it. You've got to have capstones on social entrepreneurship. You've got to have the curriculum talking about people considering their position on tacit assumptions as it relates to their world, not just in theory. And you have to use plain language. To do that, if you're going to actually have students learn that people are more likely to act their way into new ways of thinking than think their way into new ways of acting. So if they're going to act their way into new ways of thinking, they have to be given a model in the university of how to act, which means the university needs to be saying, we have a why don't we culture here. We do not have a why don't you culture. We will do it. And the last couple of ones is we must meet less, but meet better. So at my university, when I was provost, I reduced the meetings by 40% because we found a lot of the meetings were about travel and people sitting there doing their emails while they would travel to a meeting simply to mark themselves present. So giving room to actually make change work is critical, to meet less, but to meet better. And finally, of course, never waste a crisis. So at the moment, COVID has actually got a whole lot of people to focus much more clearly on the Sustainable Development Goals and also on the role of online learning in the context of a broader blended learning world where people still continue to meet and learn socially because we're social creatures. So my message is good ideas with no ideas on how to implement them are wasted ideas. And I've given you hopefully a couple of ideas today. And secondly, change doesn't happen, it must be led. So every one of you, you're all leaders of change in your own area of expertise. And if you can lead change with moral purpose, just keeping in mind those 16 lessons, I believe that's the way in which you will develop a morally decent future and country. So I thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Prof. Jeff, for the fascinating talk. I am intrigued by your LLL rule, the listen, link, leverage, and then lead, in constantly seeking to identify and acknowledge the positive achievement of staff and students as they occur. In fact, we need to get everyone on board and reorienting change as a progress to be the key move in embedding SDG, I think, in higher education. All right, we come to the final talk. I would like to introduce Professor Dr. Sumiani Yusof, which currently holds the responsibility as the Director of Institute of Ocean and Earth Sciences and Chairperson of Sustainability and Living Lab Secretariat, with a previous leadership as the Dean of Sustainability Science Research Cluster from 2016 to 2018. She has successfully synergized campus sustainability agenda aligned with the university vision and mission with the launch of Eco Campus Blueprint in 2017, introduction of Action Translational Research Program, Living Labs Grant Program, and subsequently chartered a green chapter for with support of campus stakeholders on the university's achievement as the 4th ASEAN most sustainable university in city center setup and top 30 world's most sustainable university in UI Green Metric World University Ranking for 3 consecutive years ever since 2017. Talking on Malaysia experience in leading universities toward achieving SDG in higher education, I would like to welcome Professor Dr. Sumiani Yusof, the Director of Institute of Ocean and Earth Sciences, University of Malaya. Please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good morning. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you so much to AKEPT and also IUM for inviting me to be one of the speakers today. Indeed, I am honored and I feel happy to be here, especially amongst our prominent speakers, Prof. Charles Hopkins and Emeritus Professor Prof. Scott. I know that a lot of things that I'm going to say has already been said, and I have a lot of slides, but I suppose I will repeat them quickly because of the time limitation. But I'm going to actually emphasize and also share with you some of our Malaysian experiences in how we are going to overcome our COVID and higher education arena post-COVID. So let me just, I'll try to stick to the time allocated to me. Inshallah. So the title will be on leading universities towards achieving sustainable development. Yeah, and we're looking from especially Malaysian experiences. A lot has been said by the first speaker and the second speaker, which I will again reiterate, I think, in my slides. But basically what I'm going to take you through will cover from the generic introduction right up to the global impact of COVID, and looking at SDGs and the role of higher education institution and how we in the higher education institution especially could contribute to the success of SDG implementation, especially post-COVID-19. Yeah, and I think amidst the escalating problems that we face, the global sustainability problems that we face, we know that unfortunately with the remarkable progress that humankind has actually achieved, inevitably and the Earth is confronted with multitude of global issues. And on top of that, we know that we need more aggressive transformation to ensure that we have a sustainable future, especially for the anticipated 8.5 billion people that's going to be around by 2030. And the new COVID-19 is adding on to the already existing multitude of issues that we face. It's wreaking havoc in countries around the world, causing global health crises while forcing economies to shut down. And as we know, we have to really take note of the various issues that we're confronted with, and more so issues pertaining to like climate change and greenhouse gas emission. So every day we are confronted with news, be it in all the media platforms, about global issues, either local, national, or international issues. I think amongst them, climate change would actually be among the primary, I would say, issues that we need to confront. Air pollution is still a pertinent issue. As we know, more than 95% of people in the world still breathe unsafe air. And on top of that, there's still lots and millions of deaths attributed to air pollution, especially in our region, in the Southeast Asia and Western Pacific. Plastic waste, solid waste problem is actually among also issues that we need to tackle seriously, because it's not just clogging our landfill and cause land degradation, but it's also affecting so much species worldwide. And the latest is about the issue of plastic waste, where 80% of the litter that we see around the world is basically plastic waste. Biodiversity loss is also a problem, and it's a big issue. We are confronted with the realization that threats to wildlife population are actually, unfortunately, due to human intervention, human activities. Water pollution, people around the world, more than 2 billion, still have lack access to safety managed drinking water, and more than 5 billion almost lack safety managed sanitary services. And this is putting a lot of pressure, not just in terms of environmental degradation, but also human health. So the multitude of issues that we see are actually basically what we will have to actually address post COVID-19. We know that for sure, due to the lockdown, strict lockdown, and also effects of trying to contain the pandemic, economic implications, recession is anticipated. Yeah, but the bigger issue that we need to actually confront and also address is basically the climate change. Yeah, and we know very well that we are actually in a stage where every year escalation of carbon is emitted. Yeah, since the Industrial Revolution, you know that more than 375 billion tons of CO2 has been emitted by humans. Malaysia alone records almost every year annual rate of 4% increase of carbon emission. And we need to come up with not just reduction or neutrality in terms of carbon, but also to ensure that we offset the emissions, because otherwise drastic actions that will not be taken in terms of mitigation and adaptation will be more difficult and costly in the future. Yeah, so impacts of COVID-19 pandemic has got various implications in terms of sustainability, environmental, social, economic implications. And I've mentioned this many times. When we deal with sustainable development, it's not just about talking about preserving the environment, but we also need to ensure the balance between the social development and also economic growth. Yeah, so it is anticipated due to COVID, which is actually a health issue, global health issue. We will see a rise of certain sustainability aspects in terms of environmental pollution, and also in terms of not just recession, but also informal workers and also loss of full-time jobs. Yeah? So these are among the worrying environmental impact of COVID-19 pandemic. We see that it's creating a massive increase in pollution in oceans. There's a lot of reports saying that due to the use of PPE and so on, we see that now most of our oceans are actually inundated and littered with discarded face masks. Yeah, and it is said that you will have more face masks in the ocean than jellyfish. Yeah, and dozens of the masks and gloves and bottles of sanitizers are actually causing more disposable items that need to be managed. Not only that, it is also the source could be due to human carelessness and irresponsible act of human beings. And we already have problems with the existing single-use plastic. So this is going to add on tremendously to the burden in terms of how we manage our waste. Yeah? However, around the world, we do see various, even though there's various disruption, and it has caused numerous impacts on the environment and the climate. There is actually some probably blessing in disguise, because there are a lot of reports saying that there are many regions that experience large drop in air pollution. Yeah, this is, I think, understandable with the imminent lockdowns and other activities restrictions, especially like in China alone. Yeah, it has been noted that there's a 25% reduction in carbon emission and 50% reduction in nitrogen oxide emission. And this is actually probably some of the positive impact in terms of the COVID repercussions. However, there are also a lot of negative impacts. Yeah, like there's still because of the lacks in monitoring and also enforcement, illegal activities are actually on the rise. Yeah, there's a slow investment in green energy technologies because of the slow economic activities. Yeah, it just caused some economic fallout. It has hindered environmental diplomacy efforts and a host of other issues pertaining to the impact of the COVID-19. Now we look at the challenges and also the impacts on university. Yeah? So inevitably, because of the restrictions and lockdowns, it has affected education systems worldwide. We've seen dramatic transformation and impacts to more than almost 5.5 billion students in how they actually assess education. And for the universities and higher education institution, a host of activities pertaining to teaching and learning and research are interrupted, be it through outbound and inbound mobility, events, major or annual events that university have to postpone, interrupted studies, interrupted partnerships, student and staff being, especially those who are more deprived financially, and also issues pertaining to mental and emotional health. There's also financial effect, because we know that there's a lot of repercussions in terms of intake of students due to the restrictions, and also limited marketing and recruitment. And in Malaysian context, if you look at the chronology of movement control order in Malaysia, these are some of the highlights of events that has taken place in response of the COVID-19 and the MCO, or the movement control order that has happened. The Malaysian government has actually put postponement to the repayment of the Perbadanan Tabung Pendidikan, or the loan for higher education, and online applications has been extended. And when we had the enhanced movement control orders, all public universities were instructed to continue the second semester and reschedule it. Private university started their new semester in accordance with new SOP considered. And international students are also affected and advised to remain in their respective countries, and so on. And eventually, the universities instructed their students to go home face by face using the SOPs that has been directed. And we continued on with our conditional movement control order. We had 70% of our administrative staff were instructed to report back to work, and we resume operation in higher education institutions with a rotation of work from home and work in office. And in our current phase of recovery movement control order, 100% of staffs are instructed to fully work back in office. Postgraduates and postdoctorate students and staff are allowed to resume work, whereas undergraduate students are now fully shifted to online learning and virtual assessment platforms. So the impact to the sector, higher education sector, are multi-dimensions. There's the impact on finance, as I mentioned, because it will definitely impact the registration and also student intake, impact on employees, to the students, online teaching, assessments, a new mode of assessments, and integrity of assessment issues need to be addressed. Impacts of waste because of the use of PPEs and all that we have to use every day. And I think this is the issues that all universities have to be confronted and have to ensure that they actually monitor and come up with solutions. For example, there are issues pertaining to, even though online classes are carried on, due to the requirement of probably education or teaching and learning that has got to do with laboratory settings, this will be impacted, and this will actually affect some syllabus in terms of acquiring its intended learning outcomes, especially in terms of looking at the aspects of pedagogy of the students. And emphasize on digital education is a clear step forward. This is very pertinent, and we need to bear in mind that this has to be complemented with better cyber security. And we cannot also forget that in our effort towards improving our digital education, there are still some marginalized students or less privileged students that we need to increase support to ensure that they are not denied of the education that they are supposed to get. So to me, the COVID and higher education is actually a good starting point and a good learning to unlearn scenario where we have to actually relook at how we should actually address, especially in terms of for the universities, the financial impact, especially on long-term, short-term consequences because of the declining probably student enrollment and decrease in the collection of tuition fee. And economic recession could also impact higher education institutions. There could be reduction in employment opportunities for graduates, possible of delays in student paying fees, inability of governments to meet commitments to publicly funded institutions like ours, and more importantly is the changes in student behavior towards mode and preference of particular degree programs. So we need to anticipate that this is coming, and we need to actually be ready with solutions and also aspects of how we are going to manage those issues. So I'm not going to go in detail about the SDGs. It has been discussed very good by the other two presenters. We know that it is a global action ambitious plan towards transforming the world for the 2030 agenda. It is very, very comprehensive. It tries to actually ensure that the 3 pillars of sustainable development in terms of economic, environmental, and social are addressed adequately to ensure that we have ambitious plan of action for people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership, especially with the objective of leaving no one behind. However, it can be a bit daunting for some of us who are in the midst or who are actually trying to embark on this journey. I know for sure that most or almost all universities in Malaysia have already somehow or another, one way or another, started their SDGs embedded in their universities' activities. But remember, the SDGs are actually guidance, and it, even though covers the 3 pillars of sustainable development, it has got these 169 targets and 230 indicators. So it can be a bit overwhelming sometimes, but at the end of the day, to me, it is so pertinent, it is so important, because it is the way forward in ensuring that everybody has got a common platform to actually address holistically all aspects of sustainable development. And I would like to actually quote, especially this by aspect of spirituality, which has been actually addressed by Tan Sri Zul in the first Dove series. I think that is the missing link. Even though we have the 17 goals, that says that we address comprehensively, we need that missing link or that impetus which bounds and ties together the 17 goals to ensure that it is one dimension that would actually collate, and also bind the SDG framework to highlight the importance of values, virtues, and ethics in order to create a more holistic and deeper understanding of SDGs. Because if you do it in a rhetoric manner, you are doing it because you want to actually fit into the indicators and also the targets. However, it is very important that in our education for higher education institution, the highest education that is not just about giving information, but also ensuring that our life is in harmony with all existence. And that can only be successful if you have that spirituality and also the virtues and values to transform what you do to be in line with the SDG goals. So just looking at Malaysians' introduction and also commitment towards SDGs, we started in 2014, I think. And if you look at our Malaysian global score, we are currently at number 68, out of 162 countries. That was in 2019. And if you look at where we stand amongst our ASEAN countries, we are there, and other countries are above us in terms of their achievement. And in terms of overall ranking, global rankings, Malaysians have actually been committed to ensure that we also take note of our position so that we benchmark and look at opportunities on how we should actually move forward and look at our weaknesses on how we could actually strengthen them. We need to address the issues or the pertaining aspects that we are still lacking, especially like, for example, air pollution. We have not ranked very well, especially in terms of our position in countries with most polluted air. So that's something that we need to look at, And in terms of our region, I think if you look at the report by AKEPT, we have fared quite fairly. However, more than half of the SDGs progress has stagnated or heading in the wrong direction. So this is something that we need to look at. You can actually look at how the different countries are actually addressing SDGs. And in fact, there are some situations amongst the SDG, especially like SDG 6, SDG 8 and 12 are actually deteriorating. However, the SDGs 6 goals are making progress, like SDG 1, SDG 3, SDG 4, which is quality education, where we are in the midst of our business of higher education institution and so on. So this is just to look at how we have fared so far. And I would like to actually now share with you how we could embed all the 17 SDGs in our education curriculum and also teaching and learning activities. I think the two speakers before me have actually given very good imperative perspective on how this could be done. And I'm going to echo again what could be done and how it can be done, especially in looking at how we, University Malaya, try to actually embark on this sustainable development journey in a holistic and sustainable manner. So we know very sure that education is paramount in achieving all the SDGs, and higher education is a powerful means to help create more sustainable future because we play the pivotal role as in the societies to create not just future leaders, well-taught leaders, equipped with right values and ethics, and also the ability to actually create a sustainable future in this globalized world. And the SDG was actually addressed quite comprehensively by Prof. Hopkins just now. So education for sustainable development is very pertinent. It's also one of the targets, the many targets under the goal 4, which is quality education to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning. It's very important. It's pertinent because it enables people to develop knowledge, values, and skills to participate in decisions about how we do things. At the end of the day, we want to improve the quality of life now and for the future, without damaging the planet. So it's a fundamental human right and it's a public good. And it is to ensure that we enable students to learn how all societies, economies, peoples, and environment are interrelated and interdependent. We have to understand that we don't live in isolation. We are just among the billions of species that is on Earth. Every single actions have got an impact to the other species and the environment around us. So higher education in sustainable development so far, to me, and according to UNESCO, through their education of sustainable development, has actually transformed and tried to actually ensure the integration of the SDG principles or sustainable development principles in our daily activities. And UNESCO in the post-decade of ECD Global Action Program has already identified that these are among the 4 tenets that we could actually play our role to extend our value as our teaching and learning and research activities to just our community, not just in campus, but also to the community at large. So a lot of the campus in Malaysia and I think around the world are now aiming and also promoting and implementing campus greening in line with our innovative and proactive ways towards sustainable development. So post-COVID-19 in general, I would say that universities will play a more essential role because we have the capacity and the capability to actually give our inputs and also contribute, especially like for University Malaya and the other universities. Being a research university, we could provide research knowledge, innovations and solutions. This is what I'm going to highlight later on in my Living Lab research grants that we have actually started and has actually successfully implemented and sustained the SDG momentum in the campus. We also have sustainability leadership, and this is very critical as Prof. Scott mentioned just now. You need to have the sustainability leadership, and it has to be made mainstream, because universities without the support of the top management will not be able to sustain the momentum and the vigor of individuals or faculties that is already embarking and successfully doing SDG or SD initiatives. We also have and can advocate institutional culture, for ensuring sustainability values are embedded in our teaching and learning and in our operations, and we also explore and be more flexible and more proactive towards partnership with our stakeholders. Okay, and it is so important for higher education to actually highlight and realize the importance of addressing not just environmental preservation, but also ensuring the SDG is being implemented. Because in Malaysia alone, we have a few hundred public and private higher education institutions on top of polytechnics and more than 10,000 schools. And all of our activities in terms of teaching and learning, research do contribute towards emissions and also waste from our activity. So how do we do it? How can we do it? And how can we contribute to the success of SDGs? So I think I would like to reiterate and reflect back on our Malaysian education blueprint. Malaysia has actually embarked on this MEB or Malaysian Education Blueprint, which was meant to steer our Malaysian students and also the education platform to become progressive, and also it is to ensure that we train our students towards excellence, with increased operational flexibility. And it has 10 shifts or 10 trust areas, which I think they are all in line and very synergistic towards SDG attainment. So we did not invent the wheel because we've already got this Malaysian education blueprint, but what we need to do is to empower and to ensure that the MEB is fully realized, is fully implemented, and continuously improve in terms of its achievement. So the Malaysian Education Blueprint transition from post-secondary education to higher education has already proposed and has come up with attributes that your students should actually be having to ensure that they receive and fulfill the SDG 4, which is on quality education. It's already there. Ethics and spirituality, leadership skills, national identity, thinking skills, problem solving, knowledge. So in other words, I think the Malaysian higher education system and the Malaysian education institutions could actually enhance and try to actually implement fully, successfully, what has actually been the aspiration in the MEB. And this is reflected, I think, in also the achievement of the Malaysian higher learning institutions. Recently, the SDG Time Higher Education University Impact Ranking shows that our Malaysian universities, even though with COVID-19 pandemic, has not stopped some of the universities from achieving remarkable accomplishment, including 2 of our Malaysian university. USM and University Malaya are both listed as top 100 universities. And this is actually, to me, a demonstration of how seriously our higher education institutions take their role in achieving a sustainable world. And again, as I mentioned, we have these 4 tenets or 4 strengths in a university context where we could empower and we could contribute to SDG through extensive research capabilities and activities that include interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary research, coming up with innovations and solutions for national and local implementation. We have our education curriculum, we should embed and fully subscribe to education for sustainable development. And this is also reflected not just in our MEB, but also in our MQA framework. For all of us who are very familiar, because you know that the MQA framework also subscribe to sustainability, because one of the program outcomes must actually address sustainability. So it's all there. We need to empower and engage and strengthen our leadership, and public engagement. And to me now, what we are doing in terms of our education, teaching and learning, our research activities, is to put it into practical actions. Operation and governance. This is where we can actually put in our findings and also our problem solving to actually solve and also improve our operations and governance at campus level, so that it can be replicated and it can be extended to the community.
Okay, so Prof, thank you very much, Prof.
Yeah.
We had, I think we have no time more.
Okay. All right.
Can I stop you over there?
All right. So I think I'll stop there. And if there's any questions, probably we will just discuss in the discussion. Okay.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof. Sumiani, for the interesting talk. As a matter of fact, COVID-19, albeit as a pandemic, is the trigger point for us to look at the core value of our education and reinvent our higher education. So before I open the dialogue session, I would like to call upon Dr. Zainal for the update on the poll results.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Muze. What we've done is, I think I need to unmute mine. Okay, it's fine. Let's go. Okay, we have done 3 questions. Then we have the result here. Zaida, if you can share the results. The main purpose, we have made sure that at least 70% respondent answered the question. So out of that 200 something, we've got 70% responded to the questionnaire.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the first question is to look at the response on time higher education world impact ranking. So you can see from there the results yourself. Not agree until agree. An interesting result, to see how their opinion. And second one, Dr. Muze, is to look at the issues that we may have been putting much effort on transposing the content. The reorientations of education to sustainable development will not be a success. And how much do you agree with this statement on whole institutions, WIT? So the result is as seen. The last questions you can see is to check on the students, viewers' opinion on the issues that we might see as too much focus put on putting up the content into the online rather than bringing back the functions of universities, in other words, the SDG aspect of it.
SDG aspect.
So I'll pass back to Dr. Muze to lead the sessions.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Zainal. I think we have we can see that people are agreeing with Times Higher Education as the ranking, slightly agree, and then we can see that people also agree that we need to have a whole institution in order for us to reorientate our education system. And also they slightly also agree that COVID-19 actually making us too focused on transferring everything to virtual platform. All right, okay. I think I have a few questions actually open to Prof. Charles. That's one of our viewers over here. Walter Schiedel, the author of Great Leveler, states that wars and major catastrophes are the greatest equalizer in terms of income gap. Everything else hasn't been successful in reducing poverty. How to peacefully enable SDG via education if elites are not interested in a more equitable world? Prof. Charles?
Well, tough question. I'm still pondering whether or not wars are great levelers. But at any rate, I think there are a number of things that we can do. And it's going to take a concerted effort, plans. There's not one thing we need to do. There are a number of things, and we have to have targeted audiences. One of the first things we need to do is to build a vision that people can buy into. Right at the moment, our vision of a sustainable future is like looking in the rear view mirror. We see what we need to move away from, but we don't have a clear vision of what we're going towards that people can politically buy into. I think what we are using now largely is fear, and fear doesn't last very long if the fear doesn't come true. Then people sort of build up an immunity, and that certainly doesn't work well. The idea of money, there's sort of the things, there's fear, there's money, and then I'll get to morals and I'll get to a few other things as well. But with money, you can either work it for money you save, or it's going to cost you more in the way of taxes, or the fiscal policy can also work with incentives in order to shift society to move that way. We have to look at legislation and policy. And there we're going to need politicians that have courage. Because most politicians are not that interested in good governance. They're interested in staying in power. So unless they feel that there's political will to bring in the necessary policies and legislation, that's going to be difficult. And as is hinted in the question, often the politicians are heavily influenced by the people with power and who want things to stay the way they are. Somehow we have to build in ease and convenience in a lot of the things that we're doing. Often the changes in what is required, there is a feeling we have to give up something in order to do it. And with the recycling and some of even these basic things, it takes additional and extra effort. I think also we have to show that it is better, the shift to electric cars, understanding that first of all, for instance, in Germany, the love of the fast automobile. Well, electric cars are actually faster in acceleration. They're quieter, less pollution, and now are understand being welcomed.
All right. Okay.
I think that's probably enough for now. But let me just close by saying we need the social scientists
to actually work
understand why we do what we do.
Yeah, true. Thank you very much, Prof. Charles. Now I have another question by our viewers to Prof. Jeff. The question: we are still, by and large, talking on the philosophical level, even though the blueprint attempts to put some practical initiative. So what are practical and immediate measures we can take to inculcate humanistic and SDG values systematically in our education landscape? Prof. Jeff?
Well, as you know, one of the first things I said about those 16 lessons on how you make change work is to undertake a stock take of what people are doing already. There's nothing like people seeing what the peer group is doing. So if there was a national, if you're serious, a national initiative which would actually say, look, what are we doing at the moment in this area? Let's just get that together and make sense of what it is and acknowledge it and promote it so that others who are skeptical can see that people in contexts like those are doing something that actually appears to be working. So your stock take would be not only what are we doing, but how do you know it's working?
True, true.
And that gives you then a chance down the track to in fact start by building through the strategy of listening, linking, leverage and leading. So it's the same lesson every single time, you know, and the moral purpose of it all can be highlighted by what people themselves say rather than what the government says.
All right, okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Jeff. We have another question, final question. I think I'm giving it to Prof. Sumiani. The question says, we are pushing the envelope of higher education with the sudden arrival of COVID-19. Is it political will that has the final say of ingraining value-based education? Prof. Sumiani?
All right. I think enough have been said about how university can play the role to post-COVID-19 addressing issues in our teaching and learning. But having said that, I think very importantly is for us to understand that without the right framework, without the right guidance and also leadership, it's going to be a challenge, yeah, to actually address the issues that we'll be facing post-COVID-19. So innovative and proactive leaders should actually take stock and use this as an impetus, yeah, to actually come up with forward-thinking leadership and approaching it in a systematic shift, especially affecting these unprecedented issues of COVID. We know for sure that without the support and to ensure that the infrastructure that is needed, yeah, to gear towards especially electronic and also virtual learning, you really need to have the concerted effort led by a progressive and also a forward-thinking leadership of a university to ensure that enough resources, manpower, and also support is given not just for the infra, but also towards addressing staff and student capacity and capability to adopt to this new norm. Yeah, so without undoubted information and also addressing these issues properly by the top management, I think that it's not going to be easy. Whilst universities, lecturers, and academics can also play their role to give proper support and comprehensive support to the students, the top management and the leadership in terms of their commitment towards resources is pertinent.
All right, okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Sumiani. All right, I think we have come to the end of our AKEPT talk, Dialogue on Value-Based Education. It has been a wonderful 3 sessions of dialogues, and we have presented speakers from all around the world. We sincerely hope that everyone would benefited from the talks and able to implement the ideas and strategies given by our speakers to your own institutions. AKEPT would also like to thank all our speakers from the very first dialogue session to the current one, Prof. Charles, Prof. Jeff, and also Prof. Sumiani. And we would like to also thank our co-organizer, led by Dr. Zainal, the Sejahtera Institute, International Islamic University of Malaysia, for your support and initiative in making Dove series a success. All right. Please be reminded, everyone, that recording for all the session can be obtained in AKEPT and also IIUM Facebook pages. So maybe if I could get everyone to turn on their video so that we can get a picture for everyone. And then before we are close the session, can we get the gallery view of everyone? Right. So we have about 200 plus, and another few hundreds actually in our YouTube session. So for those who actually attended all our session since the very first session, you guys gonna get a certificate of participation of this Dove series. All right, I would like to take picture of everyone. Keep smiling. All right, unfortunately we have 10 pages, so everyone just keep smiling.
Amazing.
Yeah,
16 pages. So nice to see everyone.
All right. All right. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. With that, I would like to thank everyone for attending this 3 series from the very beginning to the final one. And I would like to see you guys soon in another series of AKEPT Talk. All right. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Munze. Thank you so much for moderating the sessions. I mean, I suggest the session is officially ended, but I wonder if the speakers are still around to answer a bit of, there are still questions, which I guess is not easy for us to get all these great speakers around. Are the speakers available for us to have an informal discussion? Because there's still hot questions in the chat box that, Jeff, can you still stick around for another 10, 15 minutes?
Yep, happy to.
Charles?
Yes.
And Prof. Sumiani?
Yeah, I'm around.
Okay, all right. I guess Dr. Munze, if you don't mind,
okay.
because there are still heated discussions in the chat box. One of it being that Azam, is saying that in response to COVID, there's a lot of changes and the business are changing very fast. But the universities leaders are not changing that fast in compared to business leaders. So any take on that, either any one of the speakers, maybe Jeff to start with?
Well, it's the idea of understanding what engages people with change, including the leaders. So the strategy that I've always used is you've got to work out what their priorities are. In other words, what they've actually got to be seen to be delivering in terms of their board of trustees requirements of them, and then utilize that as a lever. So for example, at my university, our Vice Chancellor, Barney Glover, our Chancellor is a man called Peter Shergold, who's always had an interest in the sustainability area and the moral purpose thing, so that when we set up the Sustainable Development Strategy for the university back in 2008-9, we were fortunate and lucky enough to have the support of the Chancellor, but the Vice Chancellors had to actually be won over. And so it's that issue of working on the Board of Trustees requirements that actually gives them, if you like, the incentive, like a student has the essay topic, if you know what I mean. It's the same psychology of what have I got to do here to make this work. And then the idea of coming in and saying, look, we're not sure if we can help you, Vice Chancellor, but we think these things might actually be useful because we know there's this a priority for the university that's been set for you. So that the psychology of engaging the Vice Chancellor, and certainly the extrinsic motivation, as negative as some people might think the Times Higher Impact ratings are on the SDGs, there's no doubt that Barney Glover, our Vice Chancellor, became far more enthusiastic when last year we were number 11 in the world, to actually say we've got an opportunity here. This is really powerful stuff. So that notion of building on a success, and the notion of peer group, the Vice Chancellors look at other Vice Chancellors within and beyond the country in terms of, how am I looking? Like, it's unfortunate, but playing to that personal motivation of the Vice Chancellor is very important. And secondly, in terms of leadership, I was Executive Director of Sustainability at the university. I was also the Provost So I actually was at the high table. If you have no one at the high table articulating what everyone's at the pit face is doing, then you actually have a disjunct. So it's no good for people at the local level to actually complain if you can't have someone at the high table who cares about it.
All right. Okay, good. Thank you very much, Prof. Jeff. There's another question by Sharifah Hafiza on UTM Lead. Prof. Scott, Jeff Scott as well. Not all leaders have the guts to make changes. However, COVID-19 issues has pushed very hard on most HEI leaders. How to get this making changes culture in our higher education institution?
Well, you know, as Winston Churchill has said, and I think someone probably before him said, never waste a crisis. So the COVID actually, like moments of disruption are actually moments when there's more opportunity than when everything is absolutely stable, because we are all creatures of habit. So, you know, if you take the COVID issue in Australia, for example, universities have actually, in a sense, come to be seen to actually have a lot more to offer in terms of many of the sustainable development goals without articulating that that's what they're doing. You know, for example, we're working on not only on vaccines for COVID, you know, in the science area, but also how do you engage people with actually social distancing. So, for example, Australia took up, there was a whole lot of strategy looking at actually those people were rubbishing experts very, very much in the last 10 to 15 years. But suddenly in Australia, the government realised it had to do something to, in a sense, to keep in power. They went to the experts, and then we engaged very early. We shut the borders and we got into social distancing. We've currently got 4 deaths per million in Australia from COVID. 4 deaths per million. Sweden's got 500 deaths per million. Canada's got 200 deaths per million. So there's something about now the moment of realising that using expertise can actually make you look good politically. That is actually, I think, a very nuanced little way for which universities position themselves around what they have been able to do for COVID and are willing to do for their country.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Prof. Jeff. Prof. Charles, and any comments on your side in making changes a culture in our higher education institution?
Well, I think trying to compare higher education institutions with the private sector is not really comparing apples with oranges. You know, it's the private sector has retrofitting money. They have they can order people as to what to do or get rid of them. You know, so they are much more flexible. And within higher education, the whole concept of academic freedom, how do you get people to align with a new cause, really takes time. As Jeff pointed out, the various L's, you know, of listening and so on, whereas if Nokia wants to come in and change production lines, first of all, they have retrofitting money, they can borrow money, they can run a deficit, they have a lot more tools. So they're very different skills that are there. But it is true, some leaders have tremendous courage and charisma. They have, for a long time, they've treated their employees well, and people will follow them. So it's being the right situation at the right time, I think.
Prof. Sumiani, how about you? Do you think Malaysia is making changes fast enough?
In a Malaysian context, is the same. But what we need to do, unfortunately, I couldn't share my slides because of the limitation of time. I think you really need to have the champions amongst, you're talking about higher education institution, people who are already doing, because I think the different strategies in how to implement SDG and to move things and to change things is to ensure and recognize what is already being done by your staffs. A lot of our researchers are already doing things, except that they do not realize that it is actually part and parcel of SDG that they're implementing. And when I had the opportunity to actually be the Dean of Sustainability Science Research Center, together with proactive Vice Chancellor and Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research, we actually came up with a way forward, or the platform to actually spur and stimulate further our sustainability initiative by coming out with a Living Lab grant. Yeah, this is just to showcase that in order for us to actually make that push, you need to provide the platform and the right framework for people to actually see and align to the goal that universities have actually aspire to do. So we came up with not just a type of action research, translational, problem-solving kind of grant as compared to the traditional grants that researchers do on pure research in labs and also coming up with knowledge and papers and publications. But the Living Lab grant is a unique type of grant that actually entails researchers to actually look at the context of problems, come up with innovation, and translate their laboratory knowledge and outputs to the real operation of the university to solve our problems and to reduce our environmental burden in the context of campus cleaning. So it has been very successful, and I think now a lot of Malaysian universities are also adopting the Living Lab type of research, translational research. To me, it's not just translational, but also transformative, because we change and we move people to understand and to come together in the right platform to work with the university's management and improve the operations. And how we do it is to ensure that everybody buys into it. It is a grant where it is actually very appealing for the researchers. It is actually also problem solving, because the output of those kind of grants are actually real problems solved and tangible improvements in terms of our operation, be it in water, wastewater, transportation, waste management, energy management. We even have education, transformation, and also governance. So I think very importantly for a strategic partnership and also to ensure that your university or your education system not just carry out research and also activities pertaining to teaching and learning, is to provide the right platform, the right impetus, and to create more champions among your academicians to actually come up with solutions that is a win-win situation for all. And for the top management of the university, if they see that you are serious and you are really doing a good job, and it's not only actually benefiting in terms of academic output, because it does produce academic outputs in terms of publications, graduate students, it's also solving and improving our operations. And we are also, and that also supports all the international rankings like the Time Higher Education ranking and the UI Green Matrix ranking. So this is basically how you move forward in ensuring your top management buys in terms of making that fast and move change towards sustainability.
All right, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, Prof. Jeff, anything?
Yeah, just a quick addendum to that. Back in 2009, we set up the Sustainable University Rolling Fund at Western Sydney University, and we have a community engagement subject. So students, as part of their program, can do an elective, which is community engagement. So the projects our students do with the RCE projects, they actually get credit for. So it's not just community service, it's actually assessed. That's the first thing. The second thing is that same subject can be used within the campus. So the Sustainable University Rolling Fund, I developed that based on the work that my friend Leith Sharp did at Harvard, setting up their Sustainable University Rolling Fund. We got, from the Board of Governors, we got $500,000 in 2008. Our return on investment of that has been 7%. And the way it works is staff and students can work out how to make money out of waste on our campus.
Wow.
How we can actually save money. So that to get a project underway and a grant underway, we have to have a business case that demonstrates that it's likely to give a return on investment. And so it's the most wonderfully creative projects that come up, like we've got dozens and dozens of them. I won't bore you with it now, except to say one of them was a bunch of students. We have a whole agricultural school. Mm-hmm. All of this waste was just being thrown away. So they worked with a local guy in a company called Biolytics to set up he'd bring along a truck, and all of the waste from all of the labs, all the research being doing in the agricultural area was then ground up and put into a retainer. He came and took it away for free. We were paying to have it removed. And then he made pellets out of it that actually were used for fertilizer.
Wow, okay.
Do you understand?
Yes.
So that notion, I was working as an acting DVC at the University of the South Pacific for many years. And in Samoa, we did exactly the same thing there. This is easily done. We got the students and the staff on the Samoa, the Alafua campus there, to work out how to make money out of waste. So there was a piggery. Mm-hmm. And what they were doing with the waste from the pigs, they're throwing it on a garden. Instead of that, down the hill, there were 2 ponds they already found. They were there. We got them $100 solar pump. The solar pump pumped water, circulated around, washed the feces of the pigs out into the first pond. Those feces settled. The rich, nutrient-rich water flowed into a second pond where the algae was growing. The algae was fed to the fish. They killed the fish and fed them to the pigs. Now that's an example of the blue economy.
Yeah, they recycle everything then.
Hundreds of them.
Yeah.
Now, students love doing this. So you've got to have a capstone on social entrepreneurship to have it happen.
Agree.
If that makes sense.
All right. Thank you very much, Prof. Jeff. I have another question from Kasia to everyone, actually. Universities should look into optimizing the librarians. Some skills as curation and data information and knowledge management are available among librarians. Information skill is also pertinent to students. So librarians should be able to play their role in a more effective way. Maybe Prof. Charles, do you have any comments on that, on empowering our librarians?
Yeah, I think that's just one example of the people of the whole institution approach. That there are all kinds of people who contribute, and only by talking to them and finding out, how are you relevant into what we're trying to build? Are you relevant or irrelevant? If you're relevant, how could you contribute, and so on? It's like Jeff said at the very beginning. Go around, find out the possibility, what is actually happening, and acknowledge it, and then getting suggestions as to what they could do. Think of the time that librarians could save for people. So I'm totally in agreement. I think it's one classic example. There's another classic example of the director of NASA going and asking one of the caretakers and saying, "What are you doing?" And the caretaker said, "I'm putting a spaceship on the moon." Because
everyone plays a role. Yeah,
the collective. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Shaw. We have another question, Prof. Sumiani, because when we actually move on our virtual platform, there's an issue of integrity on online learning assessment. So many find the current practices for online learning have lackness in integrity as we are still adopting to online learning environment. Prof. Sumiani, have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think this is among one of the challenges that I think all higher learning institutions have to address very rigorously, because this new norm will see more of virtual learning, and coming along with that is the virtual assessment that needs to be done. So in terms of ensuring integrity and also ensuring it's done professionally, I think the academics are also needing guidance and also capacity, continuous capacity in terms of training to how actually to carry out online assessment. And I think the concept of honesty and integrity needs to also be extended to the student, to ensure that, you know, when they do the assessment and also the examination online, there has to be some standard operating procedures that needs to be in place. Even now, as we are carrying our teaching and learning and examination soon, we are continuously having training sessions, yeah, by our unit. We have the education unit in the university that gives various capacity, information, and also training for our staff on how to actually carry out a proper and also rigorous assessment that is not only in terms of its effectiveness, but to also to ensure it's professionally done. It's a continuous effort, but it needs to be addressed and it needs to be enhanced and stimulated, because I undoubtedly will see that there'll be many more issues in the future that needs more enhanced online virtual learning. So along with that, the online assessment needs to be strengthened, needs to be safeguarded to ensure that integrity in terms of achieving our objective of education and its adequate assessment is done professionally.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Yes, Prof. Jeff, any comment?
The centres are now linked to the TEXA, the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency for Australia, produces a series of guidance notes. One of them's on academic integrity, but the one I've sent you is the one on online learning, and there's an online learning as it meets COVID-19. So that's a good example in Australia of how we're actually bringing together good practice so that people, when they ask the question, can actually, for what it's worth, have a look at it. So I commend you to think of this idea for Malaysia as well. It's a very good idea of, remember I was talking about stock takes? It's all the same thing. So I've sent that to Zainal now, that link's there. You can just have a quick look at it and see what you think.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Maybe Prof. Jeff can answer another question. They are talking about how do we actually improve the situation for the indigenous communities who are now still facing challenges against deforestation, illegal dumping, waste pollution with a limited budget. How can we outreach the effective way to encourage community empowerment?
At the same time, Dr. Muze, before there is questions from YouTube, if you can share it with the audience, Dr. Muze. Question from YouTube. I shared with at your WhatsApp text.
Okay. We have so many questions in so many outlets.
So, did you want me to answer? Was that for me, that question, or for someone?
Yes, Jeff. Regarding empowering indigenous communities, Prof. Jeff.
Okay. So this is all tied into the work that we're doing at the moment. We don't use community service in Australia. We talk about community engagement because we see it as a reciprocal issue. So there's a group in Australia that I'm the mentor of called Engagement Australia, which is all of the universities in Australia are looking at ways of linking with the community. There's a subgroup of that are looking at linking with our First Nations people. So the University of Queensland is working on a project at the moment on producing cellulose from a native plant. And that's actually famous. It's about 10 times stronger than normal cellulose things. So that notion of actually using indigenous knowledge, you know, like the equivalent of going to the Orang Asli, and actually looking at ways in which that might be made, in a sense, commercially viable, but at the same time sustaining the culture and at the same time anointing the fact that these people in Australia, you know, that culture's been going for 40,000 years, to show that, you know, there's a whole lot of things that we can actually start linking up together. So it becomes a reciprocal partnership with it. If you're interested in this sort of thing, the article I did for the Copernicus Network of Universities last year, I gave it as a reference for the Envicoca journal article on social entrepreneurship, actually has details of that project and working with Indigenous people as part of that mutual engagement projects around the Sustainable Development Goals.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Jeff. Maybe just one last final question, maybe to Prof. Charles. We get a question from Prof. Rosna Awang. How do you intrinsically motivate university leaders to champion on sustainability issues especially via curriculum change, when it is less rewarding monetarily, when ranking is much more rewarding? Prof. Charles, how do you answer that?
If I understand the question properly, I think that ranking and still doing sustainability and so on, I don't see them as opposite ends. I see these things in synergy, actually. I mean, as I said earlier, we want our graduates, to be proud of them, and that they really have all of the skills and knowledge and so on that is assessed often in traditional rankings. But the whole thing is, what are the rankings measuring? Are they measuring what are the aspects of quality that you really want? And then what the whole the plus bit that Jeff talked about, so that they're higher ready or ready plus is important. But we also want them to be worthy, so not just ready, but worthy, and so on. So I think that the ultimate goal is not one or the other, but how do we produce the best possible person who will not only looking out for themselves, but also sees themselves as a contributor to society. So ESD plus global citizenship, looking out for all.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. I think we had enough for everyone. We still have about 135 actually still listening to us, and another 50 over in our YouTube channel. But nevertheless, I think that's about it for everyone. I think thank you very much, Prof. Charles, Prof. Jeff, Prof. Sumiani, and those in UIA. Thank you very much. I think I end the session now. All right, thank you very much, and we'd like to see you again soon in another AKEPT Talk series. All right, thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, thank
Bye-bye.
you.